if we didn't have social media, an argument through a friendship, we would just be okay with it. We'd accept it if there was no social media, because what that social media does is it keeps it alive. So they pass it on to, it's like, well, you don't want to be speaking with her because of this or him. And I thought that was really insightful. And she says that if there wasn't any of that, we would just put it to bed and we wouldn't have to bring it up all the time.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Generation Exceptional podcast with me, Bev Thorogood. I've got a guest today. It's been a while since I've had a guest on the show. My guest today is Mayira Thomas from Mayfly Coaching. Mayira is a poet. She is a coach. She is, let me just read my notes here because I haven't got a great memory as a Gen Xer. She tells me she wants to sprinkle a glittering of inspiration, positivity, and calm to everyone she encounters. And I have to say, having spoken to her, she definitely does that. She's an inspirational speaker, a poet, and she's also the founder of Mayfly Coaching. And Mayira works specifically with the younger generation, so Generation Z, never quite know how to say it. Let's be English today, so we're going to go with Generation Z. And I just thought it was a really interesting conversation to be having on the Generation Exceptional podcast, because I'm a Gen Xer. I've been doing a little bit of swatting up on the generations this morning. Both my kids are millennials, or Gen Y, I think they were known as, but nobody really calls them Gen Y. So I'm not really familiar with the Gen Z demographic. I've got a granddaughter, but she's 9, so I think she's now Gen Alpha. It all gets a bit confusing, but happily I've got Mayira here today to really give us a bit of an understanding of what makes Gen Z or Gen Z special and how she helps them and why. So Mayira, welcome to the show. It's absolutely lovely to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me, Bev. I'm looking forward to sharing my insight. Gen Z, yes, we're going to be English today.
What do you normally say? Are you a Z or a Z?
Gen Z, just, I don't know, it just rolls off the tongue.
It does roll off the tongue, doesn't it? It does. So, Mayira, tell us a little bit about you. Tell us about Mayfly Coaching, and tell us why you're so passionate about helping that generation of youngsters. Now, I think that's sort of 15 to 25-ish. I'm finding it very hard to get definitives on the start and end dates of generational categories. So, but I think it's roughly that sort of 97 to 2000.
To about 2012.
12.
Yeah, according to, like, I think Pew Research, they did, I think in 2019, they came out with that. It's difficult sometimes to put boundaries on each generation. But yeah, roughly about 12 years to 26 years old has come out. And primarily that's who I work with, that 15 to 25-year-olds is my specialism. What motivates me the most is really helping those young people who are going through quite, I don't know, a very challenging time of life as they're sussing themselves out as to who they are, as well as navigating through challenges, which a lot of the time we don't know as teens. And so I didn't have somebody like me to help me through those kind of situations, through guiding them. And even as a careers advisor, I now understand very much that's the secondary product, the byproduct almost, is to what you're doing. And I believe that you've got to really understand who you are first, and that's evolving, particularly in that adolescent kind of era. So for me, my program is Engage Self-Confidence, and it means engaging with yourself first before we can engage in a good way, in a more positive way, with others as well. And it's instilling that personal leadership within themselves. And that's what I want to educate them on.
Don't they get that at school?
Yeah, well, no. And I've been in education for 22 years or so, from being a primary school teacher to mentoring college students and university students. And so I've seen a whole breadth from 3-year-olds to 20-year-olds in that time. And the education system has stayed quite stagnant and hasn't evolved, as really where we're heading is more free-spirited young people, and when they're locked in to walls like schools and being told to follow curriculums that are stifling their creativity, the motivation, for almost like life is kind of sucked out of them. And that's what
Yeah.
I see. And so when I do, I take cohorts through school as well about this, they're like, oh my gosh, these are life lessons. They're not just, for school.
Yeah, we talk about a generation. I'm curious, are these challenges unique to Gen Z, or are they unique to everybody that's gone through that sort of 15 to 25? They're quite formative years, aren't they? There's a lot of
Yeah.
pressure on 15-year-olds. They've got exams, they're going through puberty, they're trying to find their space in life. They're adults, but they're not. They're kids, but they're not. They're in
Yeah.
this sort of almost sort of limbo between adolescence and adulthood. So is it unique to Gen Z? Are they different in some way, or is it just that period of time? And I guess the question I'm trying to get to here is generations are generations. They're not an age group. So I'm a Gen Xer, and I was a Gen Xer when I was 15. I'm now a 58-year-old Gen Xer. So my
Yes, that's a good
needs,
point.
my values,
Hmm.
what's important to me, how I
Yeah.
see life have changed. So, are we talking about an age group, or are we talking about a generation that happens to be called Gen Z at the moment?
I think it's an excellent point, Bev. And it is about the generation, because Gen X, we're the only people who have seen a non-digital era and moving into that digital era and that tech world as we know it now. Whereas Generation Z have had that to contend with as well. They were born into this digital world that we live in. So yeah, on top of what you've just mentioned as an adolescent that they're going through, they also have, and I asked actually when one of my young people said their biggest influences are social media, friends and family. So the social media side, we didn't have as much to deal with in that Gen X. So I love the point that you said. It's not it's not an age thing. In fact, that ties in very well to how we have to see each other. And I've asked them about this social media or this kind of, what is it to them? What does it really mean? And they've said it isn't because we are addicted to being online. It's also a convenience for them to connect with others.
Where does this
That,
impact confidence, Mayra, for them? Because they're growing up potentially in a world where they've got AI now. So
mhm,
AI is still very, very, I know AI has been around, but it's for a long time, but it's made such a big impact in the last 12 months or so. So they've got the social media element where you're seeing a sanitized clinical view of other
yeah,
people's lives.
yeah,
You're not necessarily seeing the reality behind it. Friendships are being made without that in-person energetic connection that you get when you're sat in a room with somebody. AI, as I say, is, we're even wondering now what's real, what's fake. I can imagine it must be incredibly challenging for youngsters to understand, and develop social skills in the way that we understand them. And I think life does evolve. So it may
yeah.
be that the human being is an incredible creature, and I'm sure we will evolve to manage all of these different changes in how we socialize. But what are you seeing as a coach working with younger people all of the time? What sort of differences in their social interaction, in their social confidence, in their social skills? What are you noticing?
So what happens is if they are spending more time engaging with the online world, they're disillusioned with really what's real. And I also believe, and it will knock their confidence because they're comparing with a world that isn't actually real. And actually, one young girl told me she was being sucked, and she used her hands. She was being sucked into a world that wasn't, it didn't exist until she realized. And I think it was a family issue that she was having, and suddenly it all made sense. This isn't what I want, and she really limited herself onto what social media, how much she was spending time on that. Because of this falseness, body image comes into it. You know, toxicity comes into it with friendships as well, because, and this is fascinating, a 14-year-old said to me, if we didn't have social media, an argument through a friendship, we would just be okay with it. We'd accept it if there was no social media, because what that social media does is it keeps it alive. So they pass it on to, it's like, well, you don't want to be speaking with her because of this or him. And I thought that was really insightful. And she says that if there wasn't any of that, we would just put it to bed and we wouldn't have to bring it up all the time. And that's not doing mental health any good either. But I know that there is a big program, like I believe in nature, and I think, those who have understood what benefits are of walking in nature or being just with animals, a lot of them love being with their pets. This really helps them associate with realism rather than the false. But we cover all this a lot. And another thing is, I also look at what's going on at home. I don't know a lot of the time, what they're going back home to. So I think the influence from parents, carers, that also plays a big input into how they see it. So if a parent says, get off your phones, but they're still on their phone, that's quite a battle for these young people to deal with, because role modeling is one of the biggest things, we are influenced by, especially as children and young adults and teens. So I do believe there's a big link with that as well, as to what they're using. And is it creating a balance? That's what we've got to aim for as well. So restrictive times.
Yeah. So
Because there was
sorry, I beg your pardon, I talked over you there.
No, there was a recent study somebody put out saying, 40% of young people are going to go under depression if they're spending 5 or more hours online. And I think that's quite sad. And is it because they're lonely? Is it because they're searching for real connection?
There's a number of things going on as well, isn't there? But I think, I look back to even just with my kids. My daughter's 34 now. My son's 29. When they were growing up, we lived in Cyprus when my daughter was a child. So she was 7 when we moved out to Cyprus, and we lived on an Air Force base. It was very safe. She had an enormous amount of freedom. She would literally, because they went to school early in the morning and they finished at lunchtime, she'd come home, have a lunch, and then she'd be out playing with friends. Yes. And she'd be out for hours. Yeah. And we never really worried about her because everybody knew everybody, and she was on a compound that was, protected by armed guards. So it was a pretty safe environment. My son, who was only 5 years younger, had a very different childhood, because we came back to the UK when he was, I think he must have been about 5. And he didn't have that same level of freedom. And he spent, from a very early age playing games. He's always been into computer games and things. But of course, at the time, they weren't connected to the internet games. He was just playing games. So he's got incredibly good sort of digital skills. But he had a very different upbringing. He didn't have that freedom to go out and run around in the streets, because as a parent, I was worried. I was worried about the roads. I was worried about abductions and all of the panics that you have. So he didn't have that same level of interaction and freedom. And I think that steadily got, well, I can't say for certain because I haven't really studied it, but my thoughts are probably that that's got even worse, that you don't go out in the streets and see kids kicking footballs around and in the streets, or playing games in groups out together. Not really. I don't see that as kids until you see them maybe as teenagers hanging around on street corners. And I know I'm being very generalist here, But it must be really difficult, because what are their outlets? If their parents, like myself,
Yes.
are scared to, or were scared to sort of give them that
Hmm.
freedom, then are we responsible for the fact
Yeah.
that they're having such a hard time?
Because it's not about the blame, it's about awareness that actually a fear that the parent has is not their fear as yet. It's about, so one of the biggest things I have is this issue. How do I phrase it? Communication is massive in any relationship. So what's really good is if we have a conversation with them to say, look out for these things. This is, maybe a bit of an unsafe area. Can we do it differently? Because when we're giving that conversation, they also feel like they're being seen, that they're not five. I get a lot of young people say, the teenagers will be like, but I'm not five. Why are they talking to me like I'm five or treating me like that?
Yeah.
Whereas some of them I've seen, and I can tell quite quickly with those who have had that support as they're growing up, that the parents have also changed the way they see them. So that's where I think this is. It's not instilling the fear that you're never going to go out, don't do this, don't do that. It's about the explanation and how we're communicating that with each other. It's a two-way conversation because they value that. They think actually, and you know what, parents, we as the grown-ups, I say, we've seen life a lot more. Yes, of course we have, and we'll have experienced life, but we also don't know it all. So to have that two-way conversation, we'll also hear from them and listen to them about maybe why they want to do this or that. We'll go outside for this many times. And we'll just say, well, you know what? Can we reach compromise? So it's not like a hierarchical thing all the time then. And so it's being open-minded and saying, I'm hearing you, but I'm also saying about
I wonder then if there's a need, and I'm sure you're probably going to say there is, actually for the parents to have some level of coaching around having the
you.
confidence to let go and trust that their teenagers, their youngsters will survive. I think for me, I'm very guilty of this. Looking back, I can see that where my parents basically, I wouldn't say they abandoned me and left me to get on with it, but we didn't have that constant connection with mobile phones. They couldn't put a
No.
tracker on my phone to see, to
Mm.
keep track of where I am, so they know where I am at all times. I just kind of knew that I had to go home at a certain time, and there wasn't that fear around, I don't think. But my generation, the Generation X, I think we've had greater access to news. When we were much more aware about the potential dangers, and they become disproportionate to the reality. If we look at the number of children that are abducted, or it's just out of proportion with the reality, but our perception is that there's so many dangers out there, and we want to protect our children. And where am I going with this? I think almost I could have probably done with somebody saying to me, you're you're potentially damaging your child's future
Mm.
by not letting go. You're not giving them the independence that they need. They're not, I always have said, people won't take responsibility until you give them responsibility. And I know
That's
from
true.
myself that I probably wasn't great in my younger days. I'm much better as a grandma actually than I was as
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
mum. I don't know. What are your thoughts? How do we
It's
help
not.
parents to really learn to trust in
So
themselves and
where
in their
that,
kids?
I think you've hit 2 points there. The first point is it also depends on what we've been brought up, you know, and so you can see cycles repeating because that's all they know, and that's fine. I'm not here to say this isn't, again, I'm repeating this. It's not a blame thing. This is
Mm.
about creating awareness about how we're projecting ourselves onto our children. And so the second point is it's first of all assessing ourselves first, really understanding this is where it all starts from. In that engage, what I call engage, it's how, or connection, you can call it, but it's what has happened to us in that when we might not have the trust to let them be independent or to ask them their opinions. So it's building, it's that's what we want to address first of all, because the more we connect with ourselves and really understand ourselves is when we can connect with others in a more rational, better way. I also want to look more into conflict resolution, because I think that's massive in any form of relationships, but really to understand that where it's okay to disagree as well, but understanding where the other person might be coming. So I do believe and that's kind of why I mentioned I work in partnership with parents, because it's a two-way game. And I will always say I'm having a conversation with them, not talking with them, not to them. There's a difference. That small preposition makes a huge difference. And that's where fundamentally this all begins. It's being open-minded to understanding ourselves first, because that's the hard part. It's easy to blame others or situations. It's much harder to look into ourselves and say, where's this coming from? And I often use an example with my nephew, who's much younger, when I was trying all these things that I was learning. And he picked up some pens, felt tip pens, and he had to put them away, and that was fine. And I was getting a bit like, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to do it. But then I stepped back, because there was a special way of putting them away. And in his own time, he did it. What was I getting agitated about? Wasn't because he was putting the pens away. It was because he wasn't doing it the way I want.
Oh gosh, I can relate to that so much.
So that's but we also have to be willing to go down that road, and that's hard. But if we're willing to it, that's what we want first. So the young people I work with, they're more susceptible. They're more, like I say, I'm trying to just plant that seed. I don't know where it's going to lead, but I'm giving them, if I can, the tools to help them as they go into adulthood, so that when they have their children, it might help somehow.
Because
In
Gen Z
growing
haven't
in
got a great reputation, have they?
no,
I
they
think
don't.
we hear an awful lot about, oh, delicate little snowflakes. They're the entitled generation, and I have to say, my response to that has always been, well, they are what we've made them. So actually, we have to sit back and take responsibility for our part in this, and
And
support the kids that are coming through, as who are a product of what we've created, and we're a product of what our parents
yes,
created. There's a definite sort of generational responsibility there, I think, that we need to address. We can't, especially in the workplace. I worked for the Air Force for a long time, where we had a vast range of different ages. You had your older warrant officers and what have you up there that were a bit, the grumpy boomers it was in my day, because actually it was the generation ahead.
right.
So we have all of the, and I used to teach human factors. And one of the things, a big part of human factors is communication. And we used to talk an awful lot about the fact that actually, we talk about jargon and not using jargon when other people don't understand it, and keeping conversation clean and easy to understand by everybody. But I listened to, my generation, and we talk a different language to, the millennials and the Gen
Yeah.
Zs. How can we bridge that gap? Because we do see the world differently. I see the world differently now
Yes.
to how I did in my 30s to how I
Yeah.
did in my teens. What can we do, Mayira, to bridge that communications gap? You mentioned communications. If we're talking a different language, how do we try and find a universal language that works for us all?
So, I mean, I'd love to, let's say 27 to 31% of the workforce are now going to be Gen Z, right? Generation Z. And a lot of their employers will be from Generation X. So this bridging the gap is about mentorship, would really, really benefit. But it's mentorship as in we're listening to both parties. Let's say, for example, the digital, right? Even as a parent, if you want to know something, why don't you just ask them? They might not have the patience to turn around and sit with you. But what you're saying is, I see this is That's something that you actually are good at. So could you teach me that? Because Gen X will have lots of experience and that's good. Now, are they willing to share that experience in a way that is going to benefit the Gen Z as well? So it's contributing, sharing resources that they have, sharing experiences that they have, and networks as well, saying that I see you and I trust you enough that I want to take you through this road. And also with mentorship comes, are we going to participate in group activity? Are you going to demonstrate something to us so we can also? Because what you're doing is, look, every human being wants to be seen, wants to be heard, wants to be valued, wants to be appreciated. And when we start doing that, we become more productive and we're more willing and motivated to do things. Are we giving an autonomy as well? The workplace, are we giving them a little bit more flexibility? They see it differently after COVID, working from home is a given. But are we trusting that independence enough so that they feel free to do their work? Or are they again being restricted? You will do as I say.
Is that again because as Gen Xers, we've been brought up with the 9 to 5,
Yes. Yeah.
You clock in, you clock out,
That's right.
you work while you're there. And, I think COVID did it did us some real good, I think, in taking a good hard look at how we work. But I don't know, are we reverting back to the way we were because it's the familiar? I hear so often employers saying, I don't want to employ Gen Z or Gen Z. They're flaky, they're unreliable. They want it all and they don't want to give. They want to dive straight in, and they don't want to put the time in to get where they want to be. They want to come straight in and get promoted straight away. Is this a warped version of what's real because we're seeing things through our own eyes?
I believe that's the case, right? Because I think if we haven't got this growth mindset and it's fixed, and that's all we want to see, that is all we're going to. But this is another thing, and I think it was Simon Sinek who talks a lot about this. A Gen Z might say, I want a promotion, just like that. They haven't been in there that long, but they're doing the same job as somebody else and they want that pay rise. But they might just walk because they haven't been told. So what training they would need is, how do we communicate that first? Don't just walk. You haven't asked them yet because they don't like confrontation. They're avoidant to confrontation in general. So that's part of it. But then on the other side, when they have that conversation, maybe the employee the boss can say, well, that person who's got the promotion, the higher pay scale, is because they do your job, yes, but they also rise above when the storms hit. And I haven't seen you do that. So again, it boils down to communication from both sides. So there's training that's valuable for both sectors. And so I see it as bridging that. And I think when it works, it's brilliant because you're seeing them as assets, not a problem.
And of course, as we mentioned right at the very start, generations age. They're not going to stay 15 to 25 forever. They're going to be our sort of homeowners and our senior managers in a few years' time. So we're in danger of creating real damage if we don't get this right, aren't we?
Yeah, I think leadership is changing, and if leadership doesn't change, they're not going to get very far, and that's my belief. Leadership is about role modeling in a way you want to see others rise, and I say that I want people to rise with me, and it's seeing individual gifts and placing them where they're best utilized. I don't know it at all. I've spoken to lots of CEOs who are worried that, oh my gosh, I can't do this or I can't do that. And I've said to them, you don't have to. Do what you're good at and delegate the rest. That is what leadership is about.
So I have 3 questions for you that I haven't warned you about.
Oh gosh.
But I would love you to just give us one tip that could help the Gen Zs, the parents of the Gen Zs, and the boss of the Gen Z. So 3 separate questions. What top tip would you give to a Gen Z to help them in life?
Trust in yourself and your decision making, because that's where I found them. Trust in you being unique. That's the biggest thing. It's trusting in you being, because there's a lot of fear in them owning themselves for themselves. That's what I see a lot of. They're
It's
so,
all sort of that social media
yeah,
comparisonitis.
not just that, but even in schools when they're like a herd almost, the pack.
Is it a
And
fear of
yet,
standing out? Just a fear of being different? Is that where we're
no,
going with this?
no. I don't think I've worked with so many, and I believe it's no, that they're okay. It's not, and for example, a few of my students have said, you know what, I'm openly talking since they've gone through my program. They're saying, I feel more confident in talking about anime, for example. They thought they were weird because they liked anime. So it's embracing their unique, because the more we embrace our unique, the more others see that, and they'll be like, what are you high on? Life. Because and that's what I would say. And a lot of them will say to me, to their younger selves, I mean, they're still young, but they'll say, don't fear what others think. So
That's a
to
good
Gen
lesson
Z, I'd
for all
say,
of us,
please
isn't it? Yeah.
embrace, your uniqueness and trust that.
What about the parents? What's your top tip for us parents who are struggling to well, not going to say what their problems are. What would be your top tip for parents of Gen Zs?
Show them your humane side,
Uh,
because you've experienced fear, you've experienced loss, whatever that might be, friendships, grief through loss of a person, like, dying. You might have experienced nerves. Show them that side without being counselor. You're not the counselor. You don't use your child as a counselor, right? That's a no. But show them the sides of you that are human, because then they take you off that pedestal, and the expectations for them will drop, because pressures come from that as well. And there's an example of that. I asked this young person to go and ask, when's the last time their dad was nervous? Do you know what happened? Dad said that, and stepmom got involved and said, oh my gosh, there are times I've been this. And the whole conversation changed. And she saw a different side, and she started to be, oh wow, it's not just me.
That's such an interesting point, Mayra, around allowing yourself as a parent to show you the vulnerability, to show
Yes.
your flaws, and I think it's so easy to think, look, if I if I let them know my flaws, they're going to copy. They're going to. It's going to undermine their belief in me, their trust in me. And I've definitely found this with my kids. I have a brilliant relationship with both my kids now, but I have to be honest, my relationship with my daughter when she was a teenager was not great. There were times when I thought I'd lost her completely. And actually, it started to get better when I talked about the challenges I had as a teenager. I was a little bit off the rails as a teenager. Um, I'd hidden it. I'd hidden it from her because I didn't want her to think badly of me. But actually, once, thinking about it, and she was probably into her 20s before I opened up.
Mhm.
We've both just, in the last couple of years been diagnosed with ADHD, and there's a huge amount of evidence to show that it does affect teenage girls and it can knock
Right.
them off the rails.
Yeah.
This is just another layer, I think. Actually,
Mhm.
there's a whole conversation here around things like TikTok and
Yeah.
opening up conversations about subjects that were never spoken about before. I mean, I
Mhm.
learned about ADHD primarily from TikTok.
Yes.
But yeah, that vulnerability, that allowing myself to show my flaws was terrifying, but it grew our relationship. It cemented our relationship. It was challenging though. It's
Yeah.
definitely hard to open up.
Mhm. Well, thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
So what about bosses? What about the workplace? What can the workplace do to
Mhm.
recognize the Gen Z strengths and not fall into this stereotyping of the delicate little snowflake?
I think the fundamental thing is, like I mentioned this before, is mentorship. And the boss, I'm not saying that the boss has to do it all by themselves. It's creating an environment that the company holds, saying, right, we're going to start talking to each other and really listening. I mean, active, not just tick box saying, yes, we've done it, because that's happened through lots of generations, right? But actually implementing some of the suggestions, but actually creating that, so that atmosphere that actually once a week we're going to have a discussion. What hasn't gone well? What could be done better? What sticks the same because it's working okay? but we're listening. And it's almost like backward management, upside down management.
Mm. I've heard this before, this sort of 360-degree mentorship where you've got a more senior person mentoring a younger person, but at the same time, that younger person is mentoring. You mentioned
Yes.
earlier about, you know, that they're so digitally savvy,
Yes.
you know, but also they see what the world in a different through a different perspective, and having that sort of
Precisely.
upside down mentorship, as you've just
Yeah.
mentioned, makes so much sense. How easy is it to actually apply that in real life? Is
And
it
again,
an
it depends.
idealistic?
No, I do believe it's possible. It's a choice we're making. And it's also depends on the egotistical side of the boss and and management. If that vision of the leader is to say, I want to see a thriving, productive workforce, am I willing to make changes in myself first?
And of
It's a
course, this is
choice we are making
yeah,
always.
and this is the core tenet of coaching, isn't it? To evoke self-awareness
Yes.
and behavioral changes that benefit, you know, everybody. It's more empowering to look inwards and be the old cliche, be the change you want to see, isn't it?
So true.
So
It's so true. And that's why my tagline is you empowering you.
yeah, absolutely. It has to start from within. Mayra, what a fascinating conversation. Thank you so, so much. Tell me about how people can get in touch with you, and have you got a program or anything that people can look at and join?
So I have a 6-week program called Engage Self-Confidence with Mayfly Coaching, and it has 6 pillars to it. The first E is about looking at self-esteem, to the last E, which is steps into empowerment.
And this is for Gen
Small,
Z, Gen Zs?
yes, small groups of Gen Z. So I'm running those cohorts with, yeah, they're very small groups because I've found that the dynamics are better when it's up to 4 students at a time, because then they start trusting each other to open up
Just say,
as
do they
well.
know each other, or do they come in as strangers and leave as
So
friends?
some don't know each other, and friendships have built since as well. And what that allows is they start discussing feelings that they might not have. And I work with boys and girls. And what I've loved learning about is that the boys, they like to talk some of, and they don't have that person they can turn to a lot of the time. And for someone to nurture and listen, you know. And I've loved that side. I've loved learning about that every human fundamentally has an innate wanting to be seen, heard, valued, loved.
Yes.
So that is one program, and what I want to be doing is building on the support to parents as well, and maybe working with them through sessions that they bring scenarios to me, and we have group discussions on that, because it's saying that it's okay, whatever they're going through, they're not alone, and it's reassurance that it's okay. And if we have scenarios as well, what I find in group coaching is we feel that we are not the only ones.
Yeah.
There's a power in that.
Do you know, I know you're part of my working with corporates
Yeah.
program, and I can just see so much value in you going in and working with businesses to
Okay.
help them to bridge that communication gap and to create those mentorship programs and support those mentorship programs. Um, it- the workplace just seems, you know, the as well as dealing with the individuals and the parents, it just seems like a logical place
Mm,
to really get in and you know allay some of those fears that maybe Gen X bosses have got around employing youngsters, because at the end of the day they're our future, aren't they? They're the future
yes, they
generation.
are.
They're going to be our future leaders.
Mhm,
So we can't abandon them at this point. We can't just dismiss them as being too
mm.
needy. We need to nurture them, and the workplace just seems like such an obvious place to
Yeah,
do that.
and they can, and it's if I think Richard Branson had a quote, you're supposed to keep them there so much so that they don't leave, but give them enough that they stay as well. there's
Yeah.
a quote that he says,
I
but
think it's something along the lines of train them so well that they can leave and
yeah,
nurture them well enough that they don't need to or don't want to or
exactly.
something
So
like that.
yeah,
Yes, we've butchered that one between us. I'm fairly certain. Mayra,
but I
how can
know
people get hold of you? What's the best
I'm
place to find you?
I'm on most social platforms. I'm on Facebook at Mayfly Coaching and Instagram at Mayfly Coaching and LinkedIn. You put Mayra Thomas, you'll find me for Mayfly Coaching as well. So it's quite simple.
So tell me quickly, where did Mayfly come from? I'm kind of guessing it's partly the start of your
Oh,
name.
I wish I had the my logo as well. It was serendipitous actually. I was looking a lot for butterflies. Mayfly. Yes, it's partly to do with my name, but also the mayfly insect. Actually, you can see the thing behind me. It's a fly that doesn't stays around the water. It's an insect that stays around the water. But what happens as an adult, if it's lucky, it survives for 2 days. So, I had people saying, "Why have you chosen mayfly? It dies so quickly." And I'm like, "Well, so my logo, the mayfly, is placed above the eye in coaching. So you've heard of the phrase, life is short, and it's up to you to make it count."
What a fabulous way to end the show. Let's
Thank you.
make it count.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Mayra.
Thank you so much, Bev.